Take a slow breath in and let it go. Nothing needs to happen right now. Nothing needs to be proven. This is a story about someone who never chased the noise and became great anyway. Timothy Theodore Duncan was born on a calm April day in 1976 in St. Croix, a small island where the ocean was always close and the wind never rushed. Life there moved slowly, gently, the way it does when the sun and water decide the pace instead of clocks. As a child, Tim did not dream of basketball. He swam. Every morning, he walked toward the water, feeling the sand cool beneath his feet, listening to waves that never needed applause. He trained alone, lap after lap, learning how to move through resistance without fighting it. The ocean taught him patience long before the court ever did. Swimming was quiet work, lonely work, perfect work for him. When a hurricane destroyed the local pool, everything changed. The ocean became dangerous. Training became impossible. And for the first time in his life, Tim had to look for something else. He found a basketball. At first, it felt strange in his hands, heavier than water, louder, less forgiving. But something about it made sense. The repetition, the rhythm, the way movement created calm. He practiced alone, shooting until the sun dropped low, listening to the ball echo in empty spaces. He did not talk much. He did not celebrate much. He simply worked. In high school, he grew taller, stronger, steadier. Coaches noticed his size, but they noticed something else too, a stillness. Tim did not rush. He did not panic. He played the same way every day, whether the gym was full or empty. When he earned a scholarship to Wake Forest, he left the island quietly, carrying with him the lessons the water had already taught him. Move patiently. Stay calm. Let the work speak. He did not know it yet, but those lessons would shape everything. Leaving St. Croix felt like stepping into a louder world. The air at Wake Forest was heavier, not with heat, but with expectation. The campus moved quickly. People spoke fast. Games mattered immediately. Tim noticed it all and quietly slowed himself down, the same way he had learned to do in the water. He arrived early to practice, before the gym filled with voices. The court was empty then, clean and still, waiting. He liked it that way. He could hear his own footsteps. He could feel the ball in his hands without distraction. He repeated simple movements, pivot, pass, shoot, until the body learned them without thought. College basketball was loud. Crowds pressed in. Teammates shouted. Coaches demanded. Tim listened, nodded, and returned to work. He did not chase highlights. He did not force shots. He played the same way, whether anyone was watching or not. When others rushed, he waited. When others panicked, he breathed. The game slowed around him, as if it had learned to follow his rhythm instead. His coach noticed this early. Not the points, not the rebounds, the calm. Tim's game was simple, but simplicity was rare. He moved with purpose, not urgency. He made the right play, even when it was boring. Especially when it was boring. His teammates began to trust that. The ball found him when nothing else worked. At night, while others relaxed, Tim studied. He watched film quietly, alone, pausing and replaying small moments until they made sense. He did not ask how to dominate. He asked how to be consistent, and consistency became his language. Games passed. Seasons passed. Tim grew stronger, more certain, more still. His numbers climbed without noise. His reputation spread without effort. Scouts watched him with curiosity, then with certainty. Through it all, Tim stayed the same. He called home often. He listened more than he spoke. He trained like no one was counting. When the time came to leave college, there was no announcement, no performance. Tim simply packed his bag, folded his clothes, and walked forward, calm as ever, carrying the same rhythm with him. He had learned something important in those years, that the loudest results come from the quietest work. The draft night was loud. Cameras flashed. Voices rose and fell. Names were called with excitement, with hope, with promise. Tim Duncan sat quietly, hands folded, breathing slowly, letting the moment pass through him without resistance. He had never liked noise, and he did not expect this night to change him. When his name was called first, there was no surprise in his body, only understanding. The San Antonio Spurs had chosen him, and in that choice, something rare began to take shape. A partnership built not on flash, but on patience. Tim flew to San Antonio without ceremony. The city felt different from anywhere he had been before. Wide, warm, unhurried. It reminded him of the island in small ways, in the way days moved slowly, in the way people took their time. It felt like a place where quiet work could live. The Spurs gym was calm. No chaos, no shouting, no rush, just the sound of basketballs and shoes on wood. Coach Greg Popovich met him without speeches, without promises. He looked at Tim, nodded once, and said simply, "We work here." That was enough. Training began immediately. Tim arrived early, as he always had. He learned the system piece by piece, never asking to be more than he was. He set screens. He passed. He rebounded. He defended. The fundamentals were not glamorous, but they were everything. In his first games, Tim played the same way he practiced. Calm, steady, unmoved by pressure. He did not force shots. He did not celebrate loudly. He did not react to mistakes. When something went wrong, he corrected it quietly and moved on. The veterans noticed. The coaches noticed. The team settled around him without needing to be told. By the end of his rookie season, something unusual had happened. The Spurs were better. Not louder, not faster, just better. Tim did not speak about leadership, but it followed him anyway. He stayed late to stretch. He lifted carefully. He rested when needed. He treated every day the same, whether it came after a win or a loss. The consistency was contagious. When the playoffs came, the lights burned brighter. The noise returned. Tim stayed the same. He played with patience. He moved with purpose. He breathed through every moment. The Spurs went deep that year, farther than many expected. And as the season ended, Tim sat alone in the locker room, unlacing his shoes slowly, listening to the quiet return. He did not think about awards. He did not think about the future. He thought only this: the work was good here, and that was enough to stay. The season unfolded like a steady breath, in and out. No rush, no panic, no need for drama. Tim Duncan learned quickly that San Antonio was not a place where stories were shouted. They were built quietly, day by day, practice by practice, possession by possession. The city did not ask him to be anything else. The team did not ask him to change. They simply asked him to show up, to do the work, to repeat it until it became part of who he was. And he did. Morning workouts came before the sun had fully risen. Tim moved slowly through stretches, feeling each muscle wake, listening to his body the way he had listened to the water years before. He lifted with control. He practiced footwork with patience. He shot from the same spots, again and again, until the ball felt like it belonged in his hands. The season was shorter that year, compressed and strange, but it suited him. Less noise, less distraction, more focus. The games felt closer together, the rhythm tighter, the days simpler. The Spurs moved as one, and at the center of that movement was Tim, calm, steady, unchanging. In the playoffs, the pressure rose. Crowds were louder. Moments were sharper. Mistakes felt heavier. Tim did not change. When the ball came to him, he breathed. When defenders arrived, he waited. When the shot was there, he took it without hesitation. The game slowed around him, the same way it always did when he stayed patient. Round by round, the Spurs moved forward. The finals arrived quietly, without ceremony, like something that had been expected all along. When the series ended, when the final buzzer sounded and the gym filled with noise, Tim stood still for a moment, hands on his hips, listening. The championship was his. But it did not feel like a peak. It felt like a beginning. In the locker room, while others celebrated, Tim sat on a bench and unlaced his shoes. He looked at the floor, worn and familiar, and thought about the early mornings, the empty gyms, the repetition no one had seen. The title was not loud in his mind. It was simply proof that quiet work could hold up under the brightest lights. When he received the finals MVP trophy, he accepted it gently, almost shyly, and handed it off as soon as he could. He smiled once, softly, and returned to his seat. The moment passed, but the rhythm stayed. That night, after the celebration ended and the city grew quiet, Tim lay in bed listening to his breath slow, in and out. He knew something important now. That greatness did not need to announce itself. It could arrive the same way it was built, calm, steady, and complete. And the work would begin again in the morning. Winning did not change Tim Duncan. It simply confirmed the rhythm he was already following. The morning after the championship, he woke early, not because he needed to, but because his body expected it. The city was quiet. The world had moved on to the next headline. Tim moved through his routine the same way he always had, slowly, deliberately, without ceremony. The gym was empty again. He liked it that way. He stretched. He lifted. He practiced the same footwork, the same bank shots, the same pivots he had practiced since college. The ring, the trophy, the applause, none of it altered the work. The work was still the work. Seasons passed quietly. The Spurs did not chase stars. They built habits. Tim became the center of that, not by speaking, but by being. He showed up early. He left late. He treated practice with the same seriousness as playoff games. When younger players arrived, they followed his rhythm without needing to be told. He made mistakes and corrected them without emotion. He won games and returned to work without celebration. The league noticed, slowly. Other teams grew louder, flashier, more dramatic. San Antonio grew steadier. While the world chased momentum, the Spurs chased consistency, and Tim carried that idea like a torch he never waved. Another championship came, then another. Each one felt the same, calm, quiet, complete. Tim accepted trophies the way he accepted passes, briefly, gently, and then he moved on. He never raised his voice. He never changed his routine. He never needed to remind anyone who he was. At night, after long seasons, he sat alone in his home, listening to the quiet settle. He watched the days end without marking them. The repetition was comforting. It told him he was exactly where he was meant to be. As years passed, the team changed around him. New faces came. Old ones left. Tim stayed, the constant center, the steady breath that kept everything moving. He did not resist time. He adjusted to it. He learned when to push. He learned when to wait. He learned when to rest. The dynasty was not built in moments of greatness. It was built in ordinary days, repeated perfectly. And Tim Duncan loved ordinary days, because in them the work could live forever. Time began to settle into Tim Duncan's body. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but the way dust settles on shelves, slowly, almost unnoticed, until one day you see it clearly. The season still came. The games still filled arenas. The routines still repeated. But the body now asked for more care, more listening, more patience. Tim gave it all of that. He adjusted without complaint. He arrived a little earlier to warm up. He stayed a little longer to stretch. He lifted with more control, ran with less force, practiced with deeper focus. Every movement was intentional now, measured not by speed, but by efficiency. The league changed around him. Faster players, louder teams, shorter attention spans. Tim stayed the same. He no longer chased numbers. He chased balance, knowing when to push and when to step back, when to take the shot and when to pass it away. The game became smaller for him, more familiar, like a room he had lived in long enough to know where every object was without looking. Teammates leaned on him more now, not just for baskets, but for calm. When games tightened, when noise rose, when pressure arrived, Tim lowered his voice, slowed his movement, breathed. The team followed, often without realizing why. His calm had become a signal. Everything is still okay. In the playoffs, when moments stretched long and heavy, he moved with patience. He no longer needed to dominate. He needed to guide. And guiding, he learned, required less force and more presence. At night, in hotel rooms that all felt the same, Tim lay still and listened to his breath, feeling the seasons behind him and the few remaining ahead. There was no fear in that thought, only acceptance. He had given his life to the work, and the work had given him everything back. The weight of years was real, but it was not heavy. It was earned. And Tim carried it the same way he carried everything else, quietly, steadily, without asking to be seen. As the years passed, Tim Duncan found himself surrounded by younger voices. New players arrived with energy, questions, urgency. They wanted answers. They wanted shortcuts. They wanted to know how to last. Tim listened to them the same way he listened to the game, calmly, without rushing, without pretending to know more than he did. He rarely lectured. He showed. He arrived early and let them see him stretch in silence. He stayed late and let them notice. He corrected mistakes by fixing his own first. When practice grew loud, Tim grew quieter. When tempers rose, his voice lowered. When frustration filled the gym, he slowed the pace of his movements until calm returned naturally. It was not leadership by command. It was leadership by example. And it worked because it was consistent. Young players watched him closely. They noticed how he never wasted energy, how he never argued with referees, how he never let one mistake follow him into the next possession. They noticed how he treated trainers, staff, rookies, stars, all the same. Respect was not something he talked about. It was something he practiced daily. In games, he guided the floor without pointing. A step here, a pause there, a quiet hand signal that meant everything. The ball moved better when he was there. The spacing felt cleaner. The chaos softened. Even opponents felt it, the strange calm that settled into the game when Tim Duncan stood in the paint, hands ready, eyes steady. At night, he reflected quietly. He thought about the coaches who had taught him patience, the ocean that had taught him rhythm, the gym that had taught him repetition. Now he was teaching all of that without saying a word. He understood that the greatest lessons were not spoken. They were absorbed slowly over time, the same way habits formed and stayed. As the seasons continued, Tim's role shifted again. He took fewer shots. He ran less. He rested more. But his presence mattered more than ever. The team leaned on him not for points, but for balance, the way a building leans on its foundation without noticing it is there. He accepted this change without sadness. Every role, he knew, had its time. And this one, this quiet teaching, this steady guiding, felt like the natural continuation of everything he had ever done. When the gym finally emptied at night, Tim stayed a little longer, stretching slowly, breathing deeply, letting the day settle. The echoes faded, the lights dimmed, and in the quiet, he smiled to himself. The work was still happening. It had simply changed shape. There comes a moment in every long career when the game begins to move differently. Not faster, not slower, but clearer. For Tim Duncan, that moment arrived quietly, the way everything important always had. He felt it in the way plays unfolded before they happened, in the way he could sense movement without turning his head, in the way the floor seemed to open spaces for him without effort. The game had slowed down. Where others reacted, Tim anticipated. Where others rushed, he waited. Where others forced, he adjusted. It was not magic. It was time. Years of repetition had settled into his body like instinct. The bank shot no longer required thought. The pivot happened before the defender committed. The pass left his hands before the double team arrived. He was no longer playing possession by possession. He was playing patterns. In practice, he did less, not because he cared less, but because he knew more. He focused on timing, angles, positioning. Small things that never showed up in highlights, but decided games. He taught younger players to notice these things, not by telling them, but by letting them experience the difference when he was on the floor. When Tim played, everything felt steadier. The ball moved cleaner. The defense held longer. The team breathed easier. Coaches trusted him to see what they could not see from the sideline. Teammates trusted him to hold the moment when pressure arrived. Even opponents trusted him in a strange way. They knew he would make the right decision, and that made him harder to stop. In the playoffs, the calm became more important than the skill. Crowds grew louder. Moments grew heavier. Mistakes felt sharper. Tim stayed the same. He stood in the paint, hands ready, eyes soft, breath slow. He did not look at the clock. He did not listen to the noise. He waited for the moment to arrive, the same way he had waited for waves as a swimmer, the same way he had waited for space in the gym as a young player. When the moment came, he moved once, and that was enough. At night, in quiet hotel rooms, Tim lay still and listened to his breath. The years behind him felt long, but not heavy. The years ahead felt fewer, but not frightening. Everything had found its place. He had stopped trying to control the game. He had learned how to live inside it. And in that space, where effort met understanding, Tim Duncan played the best basketball of his life. Not with speed, not with power, but with calm that no one could take away. The championship seasons no longer felt like climbs. They felt like returns. Tim Duncan noticed this during warm-ups, when the arena was half empty and the lights were still soft. The same floor, the same baskets, the same quiet echo of a ball bouncing alone. It never changed, no matter how many years passed, and that comforted him more than celebration ever could. Another title run began the same way the others had, quietly. No predictions, no promises, no urgency. The Spurs simply worked. Practices were steady. Film sessions were calm. Mistakes were corrected without drama. Tim moved through it all like a steady current, guiding without pulling, holding without squeezing. When pressure came, it dissolved around him, unable to find anything sharp to cling to. He felt the body working differently now. Not weaker, wiser. He saved energy. He chose moments carefully. He let others shine. When the team needed him, he was there. When it did not, he faded into the background without resistance. His ego had long ago learned how to rest. The playoffs arrived like a familiar season. Crowds roared, media circled, moments tightened. Tim stayed calm. He sat on the bench during timeouts, eyes half closed, breathing slowly, feeling the rhythm of the game the way a swimmer feels the water. When he stepped back onto the floor, the chaos softened. Teammates found space. The ball found hands. The game remembered how to be simple again. In the finals, the pressure grew heavy. The world looked for speeches, for intensity, for emotion. Tim offered none of it. He played possession by possession, letting the work speak in small ways. A box out here, a pass there, a shot that barely touched the net. When the final buzzer sounded and another championship was secured, he felt the same quiet settle in his chest that he had felt the first time. No rush, no explosion. Just the calm knowing that the rhythm had held again. In the locker room, he sat down and unlaced his shoes slowly, the way he always did. The noise swirled around him, but it never entered. He drank water, stretched, breathed, and waited for the moment to pass. It always did. Later that night, alone, he lay in bed and listened to the silence return. The season was over. The work was done. The routine would begin again soon, exactly the same as before. And that was the beauty of it. Another peak had come and gone, not as a mountain, but as a smooth wave, risen, carried, released. Tim Duncan slept easily that night, knowing something few people ever learned. That greatness did not need to be different every time. It only needed to be steady. The body began to speak more often now. Not loudly, not urgently, but in small whispers that only someone who listened carefully could hear. Tim Duncan heard them all. He felt it in the mornings, when the joints took a little longer to loosen. He felt it in the evenings, when the muscles asked for rest sooner than before. He felt it in the spaces between games, when recovery mattered more than repetition. So he adjusted. He shortened practices. He lengthened warm-ups. He rested without guilt. This was a new discipline, not the discipline of pushing, but the discipline of listening. Tim learned that ignoring the body was no longer an option. If he wanted to stay, truly stay, he had to move with care, not force. The game changed shape around him. Younger players were faster, louder, more explosive. The league celebrated speed now, motion, highlights that flashed and disappeared. Tim watched all of it with curiosity, not envy. He knew his game lived somewhere else, in patience, in angles, in timing. In practice, he worked on the smallest details. Where to stand, when to pivot, how to conserve energy without losing presence. These details never made headlines, but they decided outcomes. Tim understood that the quieter the skill, the longer it lasted. He leaned into that truth, refining the parts of his game that required the least effort and the most awareness. Teammates noticed the change. They saw how Tim played fewer minutes, but mattered just as much. How his presence still shaped the floor, even when he moved less. How the game still felt calm when he was there. They began to understand that leadership did not always look like action. Sometimes it looked like restraint. In games, Tim picked his moments carefully now. He waited longer. He moved once instead of twice. He let the play come to him rather than chasing it. And when the moment arrived, he was still ready, still precise, still steady, still exactly where he needed to be. At night, in quiet rooms far from home, he stretched slowly and breathed deeply, letting the day fall away. The seasons behind him felt long, full, complete. The seasons ahead felt fewer, but that did not trouble him. Everything has its time, he thought, and his time was still here. Not because he forced it to stay, but because he listened when it spoke. The body whispered, and Tim Duncan answered with calm. There is a moment, late in a long journey, when everything becomes clear. Not because something new appears, but because nothing needs to be added anymore. Tim Duncan felt it during warm-ups one quiet evening, the arena still half empty, the lights humming softly above the court. His body moved slowly now, carefully, but his mind was calm, steady, unbothered. He was not preparing for a season. He was preparing to finish well. The team around him was different. Younger legs, faster voices, new rhythms. Tim watched them with patience, the same patience he had learned from the ocean years before. He did not try to keep up with their speed. He did not try to match their energy. He gave them something else, stability. Practices were lighter now. He took fewer reps, but every rep mattered. When he moved, everyone watched. When he stopped, the gym adjusted. He had become the quiet center of the room, the place where everything settled. In games, he played with deep efficiency. No wasted steps, no wasted motion, no wasted breath. He saved energy for moments that mattered. A defensive stand, a rebound in traffic, a screen that opened the floor for someone else. He understood that this was no longer about dominance. It was about presence, about being exactly where the team needed him, no more and no less. The playoffs arrived, heavy and familiar. The crowd was loud, the media restless, the moments sharp. Tim was calm. He sat on the bench during timeouts, eyes soft, breathing slow, feeling the game instead of thinking about it. When he stood, the chaos softened. Teammates moved with more confidence. The ball found better paths. The floor felt wider. Game after game, the Spurs moved forward, not because they were the fastest, or the strongest, or the loudest, but because they were the steadiest. And at the center of that steadiness was Tim, holding the rhythm together with nothing but presence. Late one night, after a long playoff game, Tim sat alone in the locker room, long after everyone had left. The room was quiet. The air was cool. He unlaced his shoes slowly, feeling the day leave his body one movement at a time. He did not feel tired. He felt complete. This was the last great run, not because it would be the final one, but because it carried everything he had learned: the patience of the ocean, the calm of empty gyms, the discipline of repetition, the humility of silence. As he left the arena and stepped into the night, Tim breathed deeply and smiled to himself. There was nothing left to prove, only the work to finish. And he would finish it the same way he had begun, quietly, steadily, without asking to be seen. The final seasons arrived without announcement. No one told Tim Duncan that these would be the last chapters. There was no bell, no signal, no moment that clearly separated before from after. The days simply began to feel softer, as if time itself had started walking more slowly beside him. Tim noticed it in the way practices ended earlier, in the way recovery took longer, in the way the body asked for gentleness instead of challenge. So he gave it what it asked for. He trained with care now, not intensity. He stretched longer, lifted lighter, moved more deliberately. Each movement was chosen. Each step was placed. He had learned that longevity was not about forcing the body forward, but about letting it stay. The gym was still his favorite place. Early mornings, before the lights were fully bright, he stood alone at the free throw line, listening to the echo of the ball, feeling the same calm he had felt decades earlier when he first learned to move without noise. The game still made sense here. The court still listened. In games, his role continued to shift. He spoke less. He directed more with eyes and gestures. He conserved energy for moments that truly mattered. There were nights when he barely scored, barely appeared in highlights, barely made headlines, and those nights felt just as important as the ones where he did everything. Tim had learned that presence could be louder than action, and that being reliable was more powerful than being impressive. The team felt it. When Tim was on the floor, everything slowed. The ball moved cleanly. The defense held. The chaos faded. It was as if the game remembered how it was meant to be played when he stood there, hands ready, breath steady. He watched the younger players grow with quiet pride. They moved faster. They jumped higher. They burned brighter. And then they looked to him when the moment tightened, when the noise grew too loud, when the game needed to breathe again. Tim never told them what to do. He showed them how to stay. At night, in hotel rooms that all felt the same, Tim lay on the bed and listened to his breath slow, feeling the seasons behind him like pages already turned, complete and heavy with meaning. The future felt closer now, but it did not scare him. He had never rushed endings. He believed in finishing gently. When fans stood and cheered, he nodded once. When reporters asked questions, he answered calmly. When the world tried to make things bigger, he made them smaller. Because he understood something simple, that the final seasons were not about leaving. They were about letting go. And Tim Duncan let go the same way he had done everything else in his career. Slowly, patiently, without noise, allowing the game to fade around him while the rhythm stayed steady and calm inside his breath. The last game did not feel like an ending. It felt like a long exhale. Tim Duncan woke that morning the same way he had for years, slowly, quietly, without rushing the day. The light came through the window gently, and for a moment he stayed still, listening to his breath, feeling the weight of a career resting softly behind him. There was no speech waiting, no ceremony he asked for, no moment he needed to prepare. He stretched carefully, the way he always had, feeling each movement arrive and leave. The body was older now, slower, but it was also wiser. It knew exactly how much to give and when to stop. At the arena, the gym smelled the same as it always had: wood, sweat, time. Tim walked the floor alone before anyone else arrived, letting his footsteps echo once, twice, then disappear. He touched the ball, bounced it lightly, and smiled. The sound still felt right. Warm-ups were quiet. Teammates moved around him with energy and emotion. Some were smiling too much. Some were silent. Tim noticed, nodded, and stayed calm. He did not need to say anything. The moment already knew what it was. When the game began, the crowd rose. They cheered louder than usual, longer than usual. Tim acknowledged them with a small wave, then turned his attention back to the floor. The ball moved. The game flowed. Possessions came and went. He played the same way he always had. Steady, efficient, unhurried. A rebound here, a screen there, a soft pass that opened space. The game did not ask for anything dramatic, and Tim was grateful for that. It asked only for presence, and he gave it. As the minutes passed, he felt the awareness settle in. Not sadness, not joy, but something deeper. Completion. Every run, every practice, every repetition had led to this simple moment, playing one more time, exactly as himself. When the final buzzer sounded, the noise came back. The crowd stood. The applause stayed. The lights burned bright. Tim stayed still. He shook hands. He hugged teammates. He nodded to coaches. And then, quietly, he walked off the court. In the locker room, he sat down and unlaced his shoes slowly, the way he had done 1,000 times before. The room emptied. The echoes faded. The air cooled. He stayed until the silence returned, until the space felt familiar again. Then he stood, picked up his bag, and left. Outside, the night was calm. The city moved on. The world kept turning. And Tim Duncan walked forward without looking back, carrying nothing with him but breath and memory. The game was over. The rhythm remained, and that was enough. The morning after the last game was quiet in a way Tim Duncan had never experienced. Not the quiet of an empty gym, not the quiet of early practice, but a deeper quiet, one that belonged to him alone. There was no alarm to answer, no flight to catch, no schedule waiting. Tim woke naturally, the light already filling the room, the world moving without him. For a moment, his body expected routine. The muscles tensed slightly, ready to stretch, to move, to prepare. Then the expectation faded, and the tension softened. The day had no instructions now. He stayed in bed longer than usual, listening to the sounds of the house. Distant traffic, a bird somewhere outside, the quiet hum of nothing in particular. It felt strange, but not wrong. It felt like stepping out of water after swimming for decades, and finally realizing you are allowed to breathe without effort. When he stood, he moved slowly, not from pain, from awareness. Each step felt different now. Not lighter, not heavier, just his own. He made coffee, sat at the table, and watched the steam rise, curling into the air and disappearing. The simplicity of it surprised him. He had lived so long in complexity that stillness now felt like something new to learn. Later that day, he went for a walk. No destination, no pace to hold. Just movement. The neighborhood was calm. People passed without recognition. That felt right. He had spent years being known for something. Now he was learning how to be unknown again. The thought brought a small smile to his face. As he walked, memories arrived quietly, not as flashes, not as highlights, but as soft impressions. Early mornings, empty courts, long flights, late nights. All of it folded neatly into the same calm space, no longer demanding anything from him. He realized something important then. The game had not left him. It had simply become part of him. That afternoon, he stretched gently on the floor, the way he always had, feeling the body release years of effort one slow movement at a time. The routine remained, but the urgency was gone. He could stop whenever he wanted. He could continue whenever he wanted. Freedom felt like that, quiet, wide, and simple. That evening, as the sun set, Tim sat by the window and watched the light fade. He breathed slowly, deeply, letting the day end without resistance. There was no sadness in him, no regret, no sense of loss, only gratitude. He had finished well. He had finished calmly. He had finished exactly the way he had lived. And as night arrived, Tim lay down and slept easily, knowing that the work of becoming was complete, and the work of being had finally begun. The days began to settle into a new rhythm. Not the rhythm of practices and flights and film sessions, but the rhythm of ordinary life, slow and unstructured, wide enough to breathe inside. Tim Duncan woke without urgency now, letting light decide when the morning began. He stretched because it felt good, not because it was scheduled. He moved because movement still belonged to him. The body remembered everything, the pivots, the turns, the balance. Even without a court, even without a ball, his muscles held decades of repetition. He noticed it when he walked, the way his feet placed themselves carefully, the way his posture stayed steady, the way his breath moved with quiet efficiency. Basketball had shaped him in ways that would never leave. But now the work was gentler. He took long walks. He swam again, slowly, returning to the water that had started everything. He lifted lightly, more for health than strength. The ocean felt familiar, like an old friend who had been waiting patiently. Tim floated, feeling the water carry him instead of resisting it. And for the first time in a long while, there was no goal attached to movement. There was only motion and breath, and that was enough. People still recognized him sometimes. They nodded, they smiled, they spoke softly. Tim returned it kindly, but he did not linger. Fame had never been something he held on to. It had simply followed him, then faded, like everything else. He was grateful for it, but not defined by it. At home, he spent time fixing small things. A chair, a door, a shelf that leaned. The simplicity of it felt grounding. These were tasks with clear endings. You started, you worked, you finished. No season, no series, no return. Just completion. In the afternoons, he read. Books he had meant to read for years. Stories he had never had time to sit with. Pages that asked for patience instead of speed. Sometimes he paused in the middle of a chapter and looked out the window, letting the words rest. He had learned not to rush anything anymore, not even thoughts. In the evenings, when the world quieted, Tim sat outside and listened to the night arrive. He noticed sounds he had missed for years, insects, wind, distant laughter. Life was happening all around him, and for once, he was not moving past it. The routine was different now, but it was still a routine. And routines, he realized, were not about control. They were about care. Caring for the body, caring for the mind, caring for the space you lived in. Tim Duncan had spent his life mastering a game built on structure and discipline. Now he was mastering something quieter. How to live without needing to be directed. How to move without being counted. How to rest without guilt. And each day, as he lay down at night and listened to his breath slow, he felt something settle deeper inside him. This was not the end of the journey. It was simply the part where everything finally belonged to him. Being remembered felt different than Tim Duncan had expected. There were no loud celebrations, no constant calls, no sudden pull back into the world he had left behind. Instead, remembrance arrived gently, in small moments, through other people, through stories told without urgency. Sometimes a young player would approach him at a restaurant, eyes wide, voice shaking slightly, saying thank you. Tim listened, nodded, smiled once, and let the moment pass. He did not correct their words. He did not expand the story. He accepted the gratitude, the way he accepted everything, calmly, without adding weight to it. Other times, he heard his name on television while flipping through channels. A highlight played. A commentator spoke. Tim watched for a moment, then turned the volume down. The image belonged to the past now, and he did not need to revisit it to feel whole. He noticed that the memories people carried of him were different. Some remembered championships. Some remembered bank shots. Some remembered consistency. None of them remembered the early mornings, the empty gyms, the long stretches alone. And that was okay. Those moments had belonged to him. At home, he kept few reminders of his career. No walls of trophies. No rooms filled with memorabilia. The objects had done their work. They no longer needed to speak. His life now was about space. Open, quiet, uncluttered. When he coached occasionally, when he visited practice or helped young players, he did not bring speeches. He brought presence. He stood quietly, watched carefully, and said only what was necessary. The game still listened to him, even when he spoke softly. At night, he reflected sometimes, not with nostalgia, but with curiosity. How strange, he thought, that a life could be so full and yet leave so little behind physically. But he understood something now. The true legacy was not something you could see. It was something you could feel, in the way people slowed down around you, in the way spaces softened when you entered, in the way calm spread without effort. Tim had always moved that way. He moved like water. He moved like breath. He moved like time. And now, in the quiet of retirement, he saw that this had been his gift all along. Not dominance, not noise, not spectacle, but steadiness. A way of showing the world that greatness did not have to shout to be heard. As the evening arrived, Tim sat on his porch and watched the sky change colors. The day ended slowly, gently, without urgency, and he breathed it in, letting it settle. Being remembered quietly felt right. It felt like the natural ending of a life, lived without noise. Say next when you're ready for part 17. Part 17. The long view time began to feel wider now. Days no longer stacked on top of each other, like practices and games once had. They stretched out, slow and open, like water at low tide. Tim Duncan moved through them without resistance, without urgency, without needing to measure progress. He had entered the long view of life. In the mornings, he sat quietly with a cup of coffee, watching light move across the floor. The shadows changed shape, the room warmed, the day unfolded without instruction. He liked observing these small shifts. They reminded him that movement did not need to be forced to be meaningful. Sometimes he thought about the past, not in highlights, but in patterns, the way discipline had turned into calm, the way repetition had turned into instinct, the way silence had turned into strength. It all made sense now, looking back from this distance. The ocean, the gym, the court, the seasons, all of them had been training for this moment, this ability to be still without feeling empty. Tim spent more time outside. He gardened, slowly, carefully, letting the earth decide the pace. He learned patience from plants the same way he had once learned it from basketball, by showing up and waiting. Growth happened when it wanted to, not when he asked for it. When friends visited, they sat for long stretches without speaking. The silence felt comfortable now shared. No one needed to fill it. The presence was enough. Tim had always believed that the strongest connections were the ones that did not require words. In the evenings, he walked as the sun began to lower, feeling the air cool against his skin. His steps were slow, but they were steady. Every movement was intentional, not because it had to be, but because that was the rhythm he had learned to live by. The world still remembered him. Articles were written. Numbers were debated. Arguments were made. Tim paid them no attention. He understood that the world needed stories to make sense of greatness, but he no longer needed to be part of that telling. His story had finished its work inside him. Everything else was echo. At night, when he lay down, he listened to his breath slow, felt the body settle into the bed, and let the day release itself. Sleep came easily now, deeper than it ever had during his playing years. There was no tomorrow to prepare for, no opponent to study, no routine to protect. Only rest. And in that rest, Tim Duncan felt something rare, not relief, not satisfaction, but balance. The long view had arrived, and it was peaceful. As time moved on, Tim Duncan felt a gentle distance form between himself and the game he had once lived inside. Not separation, not loss, just space. The NBA continued without him, faster, louder, brighter, and Tim watched from afar with calm curiosity, the way you watch weather move across the horizon without needing to step into it. The game had changed, as all things do, and that change no longer pulled at him. It simply existed. He noticed that he could watch a full game now without standing up, without analyzing, without correcting, without feeling the need to step in. That was new. The urge to fix things, to slow the pace, to bring order, it had softened. He smiled at that realization. It meant he had truly let go. The distance gave him clarity. He saw how the game had always mirrored life, how those who rushed burned out, how those who forced faded, how those who stayed steady endured. He saw how patience aged well, how calm lasted longer than speed, how fundamentals survived every era. He had lived that truth. Now he watched it live on without him, and that felt right. Days were filled with simple things, long walks, quiet meals, slow conversations. Tim enjoyed being unrecognized, blending into the background, moving through the world without expectation. He liked grocery stores and empty parks and early mornings when the world belonged to no one yet. These moments felt like rewards for a life lived in discipline. Sometimes, when he passed a court, he stopped. He did not step onto it. He did not touch the ball. He simply watched. The bounce still sounded the same. The shoes still squeaked. The rhythm still existed, steady and familiar. He felt no pull to return, only appreciation that it had once been his. At home, he kept his life simple. Few possessions, few commitments, few distractions. He had learned that clutter made the mind noisy, and he preferred quiet now. Quiet was where everything made sense. In the evenings, he sat outside and watched the sky darken slowly, letting the day close without resistance. He breathed deeply, feeling the air move through him without effort. The stillness no longer felt like absence. It felt like fullness. The gentle distance between who he was and who he had been gave him room to rest, to observe, to be. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to hold, nothing left to protect. Only presence remained. And presence was enough. When everything else faded, a few things remained. Not the championships, not the numbers, not the trophies. Those lived in books and videos and conversations. Tim Duncan no longer followed. What lasted was quieter. It lived in the way he moved through rooms without disturbing them, in the way his breath slowed when others rushed, in the way he listened without needing to respond. These were the habits that had followed him out of the gym and into life. Tim noticed that people around him began to slow when he entered a space. Conversations softened, movements grew smaller. The calm he carried spread without effort. the same way it always had on the court. He realized then that his greatest influence had never been basketball. It had been rhythm. He had taught the world how to move more gently. In the mornings, he sat with this understanding and felt no need to hold it tightly. The lesson had already taken root. It lived in players who had learned to be patient. It lived in coaches who had learned to wait. It lived in moments of quiet where the game remembered itself. Tim spent his days simply being. He cooked slowly. He read without hurry. He walked without destination. The simplicity felt rich. He had lived so long inside structure that freedom now felt like something earned. Each moment was wide and open, asking nothing, offering everything. Sometimes he thought about legacy, but not in the way people usually did. Legacy, he realized, was not about being remembered. It was about changing the pace of the room you left behind, and he had done that quietly, without asking to be seen. In the evenings, he sat and watched the light fade, the same way he once watched the clock run out in close games. Calm, certain, unafraid. The end of the day felt familiar, comforting. He knew how to let moments finish. At night, he lay down and listened to his breath slow, feeling the body sink into rest, the mind drift into quiet. Sleep came easily now, like a friend who knew exactly when to arrive. What lasted was not effort. What lasted was calm. And calm, Tim Duncan knew, was the rarest form of strength there was. There is a peace that only comes when something is truly finished, not stopped, not taken away, but completed. Tim Duncan felt that peace more often now, in small moments that had nothing to do with basketball. It arrived when he sat alone in the early morning light. It arrived when he finished a walk without needing to check the time. It arrived when he closed a book and felt no rush to open another. Completion did not feel like emptiness. It felt like space. For the first time in his life, there was no next season waiting. No training camp ahead. No adjustment to make. The work had been done, carefully and fully, and it no longer asked anything from him. He had given everything slowly, on purpose, without shortcuts. And now, life gave something back. Tim noticed that his breath was deeper now, not because he tried to make it that way, but because there was nothing left to hold inside. The body exhaled fully. The mind rested more easily. Sleep came without effort. In the afternoons, he sometimes sat outside and listened to the world move around him. Cars passed. Birds moved. Wind shifted leaves. None of it needed his attention. None of it needed his response. He was no longer part of the rhythm of competition. He was part of the rhythm of being. Friends still called. Teammates still visited. Stories were still told. Tim listened, smiled, and let the words fade when they were done. He had learned that stories did not need to be preserved to be true. They lived where they were meant to live, in the body, in the breath, in the calm. As the sun set each day, Tim watched it without naming the moment. He let colors come and go. He let light soften. He let the day end naturally, without marking it as special or ordinary. This was what completion looked like. Not fireworks, not applause, but quiet satisfaction. At night, when he lay down and the world finally went still, Tim felt the peace settle fully, gently, like a blanket placed without sound. There was no need to think about tomorrow. Tomorrow would arrive when it was ready. Everything had been done. Everything was enough. And in that peace, Tim Duncan rested, deeply, steadily, completely. A life finished not with noise, but with calm. 4. Legacy arrived the same way Tim Duncan had lived, without noise. He noticed it not in ceremonies or speeches, but in small, unplanned moments. A young coach paused before making a decision, choosing patience instead of urgency. A player slowed the game when chaos rose. A team trusted fundamentals when pressure screamed for flash. Tim saw himself in those moments, not directly, not obviously, but in the rhythm they carried. That was enough. He never tried to shape how people remembered him. He understood that once a life left the court, it no longer belonged to the person who lived it. It belonged to those who watched, learned, and carried pieces of it forward. And those pieces were never the highlights. They were the habits, the way he had shown up every day, the way he had never rushed a moment, the way he had stayed calm when everything asked him to panic. These were the things that lasted. Tim spent his days lightly now. Nothing weighed on him. Nothing pulled at him. He moved through mornings, afternoons, and evenings with the same steadiness he had brought to fourth quarters and playoff games. The rhythm was unchanged, only the setting had shifted. Sometimes he visited the gym, not to train, not to correct, just to feel the space. The sound of the ball still echoed the same way. The floor still carried memory. Tim stood quietly, hands behind his back, breathing slowly, letting the past and present overlap for a moment before gently separating again. He did not linger. Legacy was not a place to stay. It was something to leave behind. At home, his life was simple and full. He cooked. He read. He walked. He rested. The days did not ask for more, and he did not offer less. There was a balance now that had taken a lifetime to earn. In the evenings, when the sky darkened and the world slowed, Tim sat outside and watched the light fade, feeling the same calm he had felt after long playoff games, the calm that came when effort ended and stillness began. He smiled sometimes quietly at how everything had come full circle. The boy who learned patience in the water had taught it to the world on land. The man who never raised his voice had been heard by millions. The player who avoided the spotlight had become a guiding light. And now, with nothing left to prove and nowhere left to go, Tim Duncan rested inside the legacy he never tried to build. It built itself. Long after the noise had faded, the rhythm remained. Tim Duncan noticed it in the smallest things, the way he walked through rooms without disturbing them, the way his breath settled automatically when the day grew heavy, the way his hands moved with quiet certainty, even when there was nothing to hold. The rhythm had never left him. It had only changed shape. He felt it in the mornings when light filled the room slowly, the same way a game once unfolded possession by possession. He felt it in the evenings when the sky dimmed without asking permission. The world still moved in patterns, and Tim still lived inside them with ease. He no longer measured days by productivity. He measured them by calm. Some days were full. Conversations, walks, small projects that took time and patience. Other days were empty, long stretches of silence, hours where nothing happened at all. Tim loved both. He had learned that emptiness was not something to fill. It was something to rest in. When people spoke to him about basketball now, he listened kindly but briefly. He answered questions with simple truths, not lessons. The game had already taught him everything it could. There was no need to repeat it. What mattered now was how that rhythm lived on. He saw it in the way people moved more slowly around him, unconsciously matching his pace. He saw it in the way conversation softened when he entered a room. Calm had become his language, and it spread without effort, the same way it always had. Tim understood then that rhythm was the real legacy. Not rings, not banners, not records. Rhythm, the ability to move through life without rushing it, the ability to wait without anxiety, the ability to act without force. These were the things that lasted long after the lights went out. In the evenings, Tim often sat outside, listening to night settle. He felt the temperature drop, the air change, the world quiet itself naturally. It reminded him of sitting on the bench after games, when the arena slowly emptied and the echoes faded. That moment, when effort ended and stillness began, had always been his favorite. Now his life was full of those moments. At night, he lay down and let sleep arrive gently, without effort. His breath slowed, deep and steady, the same breath that had carried him through practices, games, seasons, and years. It carried him now through rest. The rhythm continued, not because he tried to keep it, but because it had become who he was. And as the night deepened, Tim Duncan rested inside that rhythm, knowing that nothing important had been lost, and nothing important would ever need to be found again. At the center of everything, there was stillness. Not silence, stillness. Tim Duncan felt it most clearly in the early mornings, before the world decided what it would become that day. The air was cool. The light was soft. The house was quiet enough that even small movements felt important. He sat with a cup of coffee in his hands and did nothing else, letting the moment arrive fully before moving on. This was a new kind of strength. In his playing days, stillness had been something he carried into chaos. Now chaos had disappeared, and stillness remained on its own, wide and unchallenged. He did not need to defend it anymore. He could simply live inside it. Tim noticed that his thoughts had changed. They came more slowly. They stayed less. They left without argument. There was no need to solve anything. No need to plan too far ahead. Each day opened when it was ready, and he stepped into it the same way he had stepped onto the court for years, calm, prepared, unafraid. He spent more time noticing the sound of wind in trees, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement, the way light shifted across walls throughout the day. These details had always been there, but he had once moved past them too quickly. Now they were the day itself. Sometimes he sat for long stretches without moving at all, not resting, not thinking, just being. The body felt heavy and light at the same time, anchored and free. The breath moved slowly, quietly, like a tide that no longer needed direction. This was the place he had been training for his whole life. Not a championship, not a moment, not a victory, but this ability to be still without feeling empty. Tim thought about that sometimes, how the ocean had taught him patience, how the gym had taught him repetition, how the game had taught him timing. Every lesson had been leading here to this simple skill of presence. The world still moved fast around him. Phones buzzed, news flashed, people rushed. Tim did not follow. He walked slowly through his days, letting them unfold without interference. When he spoke softly. When he listened fully. When he rested without guilt. And when the night came, he welcomed it the same way he welcomed everything else, without resistance. He lay down and let the body sink, the breath slow, the mind soften. There were no thoughts to chase, no memories to hold, no future to prepare for. Only the quiet pulse of life moving through him, steady and kind. At the center of everything, Tim Duncan rested. And in that stillness, the journey finally ended, not with a sound, not with a signal, but with the calm certainty that nothing else was needed. The night no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a place. A wide, calm place where everything could finally rest. Tim Duncan noticed how easily the evening arrived now, how the light dimmed without asking, how the world softened on its own, how even the air seemed to slow when darkness settled. He welcomed the night the same way he had once welcomed empty gyms and quiet mornings, with respect, with calm, with patience. He moved through his home slowly, turning off lights one by one, not rushing the moment. Each small action felt complete in itself. Nothing needed to be done quickly anymore. Time was no longer something to manage. It was something to live inside. He sat for a while before bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling. The soft creak of wood, the distant hum of the world, the steady rhythm of his own breath. These sounds blended together, forming a kind of music he had never had time to hear before. When he lay down, the body released easily. Shoulders softened, hands loosened, breath deepened. Sleep did not come immediately, and that was fine. Tim had learned not to force anything. He rested in the space between waking and sleep, the same space he had once lived in between possessions, between rounds, between moments of pressure. Memories floated by, light and ungrasped. A gym at dawn, a pass perfectly timed, a quiet locker room, a handshake after the final game. He did not hold them. He let them drift. The mind quieted on its own, the way water stills when nothing disturbs it. The breath slowed until it barely moved at all. The body sank deeper into the bed, heavy and safe, held by the same calm that had carried him his entire life. This was the night that stayed. Not dramatic, not loud, not final, just steady and endless, like the rhythm he had always trusted. And as sleep finally arrived, it did not take him away from anything. It simply carried him deeper into the calm he had already found. The night held him, and it would continue to hold him, long after the story faded, long after the words ended, long after the world moved on. Because some nights do not pass, they remain.